It is 7 o'clock. Good evening and welcome to Know Before You Grow, a subcommittee of Petaluma Urban Chat. I'm Dan Like, and as always, thank you to Dave Alden and Sharon Kirk for doing the heavy lifting. Tonight we have Chuck Marohn, but before we get to that and before we have Dave introduce him, I'm going to do a few announcements. First is we have been Zoom bombed in the past. We may be Zoom bombed in the future. If things get weird, hang loose, and I will kick everybody out and we'll start again. If I kick you out accidentally, join in. I haven't gone down the list here to check, but we generally have various people who are subject to the Brown Act Sunshine Law. And if you see them and wonder why they're not participating, they may be making decisions about serial meetings, and that's fine. If you are subject to that, please make your own meetings. Upcoming events. Wednesday, please check the website as always. Wednesday, February 23rd, we have Developer Urban Mix talking about their Oyster Cove project along the river adjoining D Street Bridge. Wednesday, March 9th, we have Lee Sheehan, founder and director of Vision Zero Network, talk about reducing pedestrian and bicyclist injuries and deaths. Wednesday, March 16th, the Scannell development team will present their project on the east bank of the Petaluma River across from the proposed river park. Wednesday, March 23rd, Michael McGinn of CEO of America Walks will talk about the value of walking and how to encourage walkability. And on Wednesday, April 13th, Eddie Cummins, the recently arrived new SMART general manager, will talk about the shared future of SMART in Petaluma. Wednesday, April 27th, Bay Area housing specialists Jane Lynn and Annie Fryman will talk about missing middle housing. And on Thursday, February 24th at noon at Aquas Cafe, we will get together in person, hopefully outside, I think, because I'm still masking up inside, and have a general planning and what's up discussion. With that out of the way, I will sit back to watching for people flushing toilets in the background and muting them. And oh, the chat is open. And if we can talk in the chat, if we can keep the chat focused on kind of building better, more focused questions for Chuck, and I will keep track of those and introduce those at the end, that would be awesome. With that, I will turn the floor over to Dave, who will introduce Chuck. Dave, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to everyone who's here this evening. I'm pleased we're going to have a good attendance for Chuck, and hopefully a few more people will keep wandering in. I did want to mention a few key people who are here from the city this evening, Petaluma City. I see two council members here, Delinda Fisher and Dennis Posake. Thanks for doing this. From staff, I see the Public Works Director, Christopher Bolt, the Assistant Public Works Director, Gina Benedetti-Petnick, and the Traffic Engineer, Ken Eichstead. So good stuff to have you folks here, and thank you for taking part. It's great to have Chuck here this evening. I first met Chuck nearly 10 years ago, and I'm pleased to bring him here to Petaluma, at least on Zoom. We'll keep working at getting him here in person. Perhaps tonight will be a step in that direction. Chuck brings something to his field of expertise that I respect: the willingness not to accept the status quo automatically, but to look with clear eyes at the underpinnings to ensure we're making the best possible decisions. Those who were here 2 weeks ago when we presented Chuck's thoughts on sustainable municipal finances, and those who are here this evening will learn that Chuck challenges shibboleth, that he questions the status quo. When I come across someone like this, I sometimes wonder if I'm being too uncritical and missing fatal flaws in this new way of thinking. So I've searched reviews of his two books to see if there are people who can offer credible reasons why he's wrong. There are certainly people who say negative things, but most of them write that he's sometimes redundant, that they don't find his examples to be on point, or that his punctuation is flawed. I don't know about you, but when I come across somebody challenging the status quo, and the best that the critics can offer is that he uses commas badly, I'm awfully sure he has things to tell us which we should be hearing. So Chuck, tell us something we should be hearing.
Hey, thanks, friend. That's very kind. And yeah, I've been waiting for a dozen years now for the really good critic to stand up and say, here's where you're wrong. And in fact, the first few years of doing this, I actively search for that. Like, tell me where I'm wrong, show me. And yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I'm perfect and right in everything, but I think there's a core message here that obviously resonates with a lot of people, and I think gives us a lot to think about. Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I don't know if you all affiliate from a basketball standpoint more with Sacramento or with Golden State, but my Timberwolves are playing Sacramento tonight for the second night in a row, and when we're done with here, I'm going to watch it on delay. We are actually a good team this year for the first time in like 20 years, so it's kind of fun. I'm going to start with this, and then I've got some slides to share with you and some things to go through, but I'm going to skip the beginning of the presentation because we want to leave a lot of time at the end for discussion. The beginning of the presentation really goes into this idea that we can build our way out of, or we can fund our way out of our current transportation woes. You see this in California, the massive deficit you have in infrastructure maintenance at the state level, at the local levels. We see this at the federal level. Regardless of what you thought about the president's infrastructure plan, the consensus on that document, both from the left and the right, was that it was a very big number. It was a very large, aggressive number. There were different reactions to it, but the consensus was this is a very big, bold plan. The president's very big, bold plan, which by the way was whittled down substantially over time, identified 178,000 miles of roadway that is currently in poor condition. Over the next decade, this very large, aggressive plan would fund 12% of those roads, the maintenance of 12% of them. That is fewer roads than will be added to the list over the next decade of poorly maintained roadways. The president's plan proposed to fund or identified 45,000 bridges that are in a state of disrepair. It proposed to fund 10,000 of those 45,000. Again, more bridges are going to be added to the backlog of those needing critical maintenance over the next decade than what the president's plan would have fixed. Now, let's make something clear about the president's plan. In a bipartisan compromise, so this is a non-political, non-partisan kind of statement, that plan was whittled down even further and then passed as this kind of once in a decade or once in a, every blue moon kind of injection of infrastructure funds into the system. We do not have the capacity, we do not even have a credible plan to maintain all the infrastructure we built. And the infrastructure transportation point in particular, was designed to solve a very specific problem at the end of World War II, and that was to keep us out of the Great Depression. The policymakers at the time were really struggling with how do we create a national strategy to grow our economy and keep us out of the Depression? And they came up with, among other things, the interstate highway system, the GI Bill, the idea of expanding suburbs and really copying a development model pioneered in Detroit and making that the default across all of North America. We have reached, and we've long passed, the end of the productive implementation of that model. And we are searching for a new model, a new approach, a new way to generate not just growth in our economy, but growth that results in people and families and becoming more wealthy, communities becoming more prosperous, our economy becoming more stable and more productive over time in a way that our current system does not. So what I want to talk about today is what that new system would look like. What does a different transportation system look like? One that serves people, not necessarily the overarching kind of top-down mandate for stimulating GDP growth in the next quarter. In order to do that, in order to have that conversation, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here deconstructing our current system. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what a different model would look like and what the emphasis of it would be. So let's start with this. This is like a kid's drawing of the hierarchical road network. We're all very familiar with this. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but the idea here is simple. It's local streets flow into collector streets. Collector streets flow into arterials, into principal arterials, small to big. We all like intuitively get this because this is the system we all live in. I want you to take a moment and ponder a watershed. In a watershed, we will have little creeks and ditches that will flow into brooks. They'll flow into streams. They'll come together into rivers. Modest little rivers will flow into larger rivers. Larger rivers flow into major tributaries. We get how this works. It's like hydrology 101. We also understand that when you get rain throughout a watershed, if that rain is intense enough or if it is persistent enough, you will get all that water coming together to create a flood. This is so rudimentary that in hydrology 101, which I took, we spend about 5 minutes on this because everybody understands how this works. Everybody gets the system. Everybody knows the dynamics at work here. Yet for some reason, when hydrology 101 ends, and as a civil engineering student, you walk across the street into traffic 101, the same exact system becomes confounding to us. We look at a little bit of stuff happening on the edge of a commuter shed. When that action is intense enough or persistent enough, we're absolutely befuddled as to why we continue to get floods. How does our system have overwhelming levels of congestion all the time? I want you to think for a second that if you were going to create a system that generated the maximum amount of congestion possible, what would it look like? It would look like this system here. It would look like the one that we have created, where we take everybody who could possibly be on the road, encourage them to be on the road at the same time, and funnel them all into the same exact place. That is the system that we have created. It is why congestion is a ubiquitous condition of the North American development pattern. In California, you have unbearable levels of congestion, notoriously unbearable levels of congestion. All over North America, we see the same thing repeated again and again. I just read a report last week from Massachusetts where they're talking about the level of service being E and F on their interstates and having massive amounts of their days where traffic just doesn't move at all. In Brainerd, Minnesota, the city where I'm at right now, my hometown where I live, population 14,000, we have unbearable levels of congestion. If you went out at 10 minutes to 8 any morning and sat at the stoplight in the middle of town and interviewed the drivers in their cars and said, what do you think of traffic? They would say, oh my gosh, the congestion here is unbearable because we've taken everybody that we can from the region, funneled them into their car into the same place at the same time. 10 minutes later, it would be clear, right? But for that moment in time, this system has generated the maximum amount of congestion possible. Because of this, and because congestion is such a killer to our system, we have created or come to tolerate a bizarre level of over-design within our systems. We actually systematically over-design and overbuild to try to compensate for this congestion that we know is coming, that we see occurring all the time. This is not a system that anyone could call efficient. This is not a system that anyone could call optimized. In fact, if you were to float above the traffic stream during a peak period of time and look down, what you would see is that 5% or less of the transportation investment that we collectively have made would be absolutely flooded and overwhelmed. But 95% of the investment that we've made would have hardly any usage at all. That is not an efficient system. That is not an optimized system. The over-design combines with this design principle that is called forgiving design. And actually, if you use the term forgiving design with engineers, many of them won't know it because this is just called the design process. The forgiving has been dropped a long time ago, but it still is operative in terms of how we build things. This idea that we can, as engineers, and by the way, I think this is a brilliant idea, that as engineers, we can look at and understand the common mistakes that drivers make in operating motor vehicles, and we can design our systems to compensate for those mistakes, thus making the streets and the roads much safer. Let me walk you through how this works because it's actually quite simple. Let's take a very simple 2-lane roadway through the woods. We've got traffic going in each direction. We all understand that drivers, really through no fault of their own, maybe an inattentive moment or what have you, the vehicle will float a little bit. We all do this when we drive sometimes. We float a little bit. What we don't want to have happen is for the driver to float across the center line of the lane and hit an oncoming vehicle. So the way we compensate for that in our design is we widen out the lane. We give people a little bit more room to work. We give them a little room to float. We understand that drivers, sometimes make mistakes, very understandable mistakes, very, frequent recurring mistakes. Sometimes they will actually go off the edge of the driving lane and wind up on the edge of the road. We don't want that to end in them getting sucked off to the side or flipped over or what have you. So what we do is we add a little bit of recovery room, a little bit of room where they can get off to the side, or if they do happen to get off the side, they can recover and get back into the roadway and continue on their way. We then understand that sometimes drivers, despite all the best intentions and all their earnestness, are going to leave the roadway entirely. And when they leave the roadway, they're going to have a lot of kinetic energy built up. We want that energy to dissipate before they run into something that is not going to give way. And so a forgiving design would say we remove those trees and give them room to dissipate all that energy before there is a violent and traumatic collision. This is a forgiving design. And let me just reiterate that this was a brilliant innovation by engineers. If you look back historically at the early days of highway engineering or roadway engineering, the fatality rates before we started to do forgiving design were astronomical. Last year, we had a little over 40,000 people die on America's roadways. If we had the same death rate per mile traveled that they had in 1935, the death rate last year would be over 500,000. And so there are literally millions and millions of people's lives have been saved giving design and by this design approach. It's been copied all over the world. And it is really, really something that we should be, as a profession, very proud of. There's a problem with this, though. And I think some of you probably suspect already what it is. This design approach works really, really great on the open road. When we bring it into our urban areas, when we bring it into places where we have complexity, what happens is we signal to drivers that we got your back, given your mistakes. We've in a sense, designed your mistakes out of the system, and drivers respond by going fast. They respond by speeding up. It's a very natural human response, but in a complex urban environment, an environment where vehicles stop and start, turn, park, pull out, cross traffic, where you've got people on foot, people on bikes, people in wheelchairs, kids chasing kickballs out into the street, dogs running across the lane. When you have all this urban space, giving drivers a false sense of security, a sense that they are, we got your back, you can drive fast, is absolutely the wrong message we want to send. This might be confusing because a lot of people think, well, obviously we don't apply the same standards to highways that we apply to city streets. This is a picture of the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. In the business, we call this the MUT CD, or the MUT. It is a Bible of sorts for how we design transportation systems. The street in front of your house was designed in reference to the MUT. If you open up the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices and try to discern a difference between that street design and the design of highway, you can look up the actual definition of a street, and it will literally say street, see highway. There is no discernment in any way in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices between the types of things you would do on a street and the types of things you would do on a highway. This is obviously a massive oversight and a massive shortcoming. This has caused this very odd situation that we're all familiar with, particularly in California, where you will have streets that are designed for 60-mile-an-hour speeds, where the traffic travels at 40 miles an hour and the speed limit is set at something around 30 or 25 miles an hour. So you have this huge range of outcomes between what we want people to travel, what people actually travel, and what it's designed to accommodate. Engineers will often call this creating a buffer, but it actually is the opposite. It is licensing a certain level of deviance that we don't want to occur. I want to emphasize what I think is a brilliant engineer insight, and that is that humans will make mistakes and design to compensate for those mistakes, because that particular insight can help us a lot when it comes to solving these problems. This is what I'm showing you right here is a graphic derived from research by some cognitive psychologists. This actually comes from a book written by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. If you've not read this book, I would highly recommend it. You'll begin it by thinking that you are a smart, rational, thoughtful person, and you will end it by recognizing that you are a modestly evolved chimpanzee. And I'm not putting that on you, I'm putting that on myself as well. Human beings are modestly evolved chimpanzees, chimpanzees, and much of our brain functions in this way. Kahneman talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking. System 1 being this intuitive and instinctual way of thinking. If I ask you what the answer to 1 + 1 is, everybody can say 2. You say that in a very unconscious, fast, associative, automatic way. You don't have to think real deeply about it. You don't have to ponder it. It just comes to your brain very quickly. Most of the time we spend in system 1 operating very quickly like that, without having to, in a sense, crowd everything else out of our brain. If I ask you to add up 2 4-digit numbers, if I ask you to add up 5,434 plus 3,210, there's some freak on this call that can probably do that very quickly. I'm not one of them. Most of us cannot. Most of us, if we're going to do that complex math problem, would have to crowd the rest of the things out of our brain, focus visually on those numbers, carry the 1, do all those kind of operations. That would be a lot of effort. It would be slow. It would take a lot of concentration, and we couldn't do anything else simultaneously with that. Here's why I'm spending time on this insight. A lot of advocates and a lot of people who advocate for street safety improvements, especially those who advocate for severe punishment for drivers who are involved in fatalities or crashes that result in traumatic injury, would like driving to be a system 1 process, or I'm sorry, a system 2 process. They would like everyone who's driving to have maximum concentration and maximum attention to their driving. But the reality is that driving, as we all know, is a system 1 activity. It's an activity that you can do, or that you do while you are listening to the radio, singing along to a song, talking to someone in the passenger seat. And let me be very clear. If driving were not a system 1 activity, humans could not do it. Most humans could not. If driving were a system 2 activity, if it was something that took a lot of tension and a lot of concentration, most people could not do it. The only people who can spend extended amounts of time in system 2 are people who are like jet fighter pilots and race car drivers, right? Like they're a very special breed of people. Most people operate vehicles all the time in system 1. This brings us to a very uncomfortable truth. And that uncomfortable truth is that a lot of the campaigns we do, be safe, drive smart, to try to get drivers to change their behavior, are actually wastes of time. Because the uncomfortable truth is that people will tend to drive the speed they feel comfortable driving, regardless of any other factor. This is a widely known truism of the engineering profession. That truism often manifests in something they call the 85% rule. The 85% rule is this recognition that when we go out and do a speed study, we ask ourselves, are people driving over the posted speed limit? And if they are driving over the posted speed limit, the proper response from an engineering standpoint is to do what? It's to raise the speed limit. Because what engineers have recognized, particularly on the open road, is that it's not speed that is the problem per se, it's differential in speed. If someone is driving 40 miles an hour and someone is driving at 60 miles an hour, that is a way more dangerous situation than everybody driving 70 miles an hour, even though the latter is a much faster or higher speed. And so engineers have developed this response that it is based on science, based on data, and based on a deep and I think correct understanding of human intuition. You can put up a lower stop sign, or I'm sorry, a lower speed limit sign. And what you will do is you will create confusion and an increased number of crashes on a roadway. Now, I said the word roadway. This philosophy, this mindset, this set of insights works really great on the open road, but much like the manual on uniform traffic control devices, it does not work on our local streets, right? When we have people driving very fast down complex streets, because we've signaled to drivers that we got your back, we've forgiven your mistakes, we've given you extra room to move. We know that the randomness of local streets is what creates the potential for trauma, the potential for crashes, the potential for fatalities. It's not necessarily the speed as much as the speed combined with the randomness, the complexity that exists there. So when we get to streets, it's a completely different approach. We go and we do a speed study and we say, is there excessive speeding? And the answer is yes. The proper response then is that we need to change the design of the street. We actually need to signal something different to the drivers. We need to signal to the drivers that the speed you're going is not a safe speed. At Strong Towns, we have a saying, if you need a sign to tell people to slow down, you designed your street wrong. A good designed street should intuitively communicate to a driver the speed they should travel. And let me say this in a different way. A driver should feel uncomfortable driving at speeds that are in excess of what is safe. The driver should actually feel discomfort when they reach speeds that are above neighborhood speeds, and neighborhood speeds are 15 to 20 miles an hour. And so how do you achieve neighborhood speeds in that range? Well, the answer is you do the opposite of forgiving design, right? Instead of removing the trees, you bring the trees in. Instead of widening the lanes, you narrow them. Instead of creating recovery area, you actually create edge friction so that drivers, when they reach speeds that are above what are safe for a neighborhood, actually feel a certain amount of tension and react to that psychologically by slowing down. If we go into any design manual or really any engineering book that is going to describe this relationship, you'll generally see a chart something like this. On the right side here, you have the hierarchical road network, arterials, collectors, local. And on the left here, you've got this nice graph that lays out the trade-off between mobility and access. And let me say this in non-engineering terms, between getting through a place, mobility, and being in a place, access. And so what is being described here is that on an arterial, we are focused mostly on getting through a place. There's not a lot of effort on building a place. And when we're on a local street, we are very focused on land access. We're very focused on building a place, not on how fast we can get through a place. There's this middle, like magical area though, the collector, where you can kind of have your metaphorical cake and eat it too, right? You can both be in a place and get through a place simultaneously. I want to focus on these extremes and this middle area, because that's the problematic part, and the part when we get to what do we do differently, we really need to focus on. These areas on the end, when we say we don't have the money to maintain what we have, and I prompt us to say, well, we need to make different transportation investments. That begins with recognizing that we can make these investments on the edge here very cost effectively. We can connect places on the open road and improve capacity in those corridors and see amazing returns when we connect places over distance. Likewise, we can make investments in building great streets and great neighborhoods, and we can see that pay off with increased tax base, increased community wealth, increased job and business opportunities, increased entrepreneurism. There's a lot that comes from great streets. But it's this middle part here where we're trying to have a place and a throughput at the same time, that we make enormous amounts of investment and actually see negative, deeply negative returns on those investments. Coincidentally, we can build things that are really safe at these edges as well. Highways, the interstate system in North America is some of the safest transportation ever built. Per mile travel, the death rate on our interstate systems is really, really, really low. Ridiculously safe. The same thing on local streets. If you talk to insurance companies, they might tell you, oh no, local streets are not safe. They're talking about claims. They get a lot of claims on local streets, but those claims tend to be of the fender bender, the dented door, that kind of thing. What you don't get in these environments are fatalities and traumatic injuries. Where you get fatalities and traumatic injuries is in this middle area here, where speeds are high enough, again, above 20 miles an hour, when speeds are high enough to create that trauma. And you've also added in the complexity of a place, all the turning, all the stopping, all the movement. Unfortunately, if we step back and we look at these investments, we can see that immediately after World War II, we were very focused on building the extremes. As time has gone on, we've migrated to that center area. And I would put forth that the bulk of our transportation investment over the last 40 years, and certainly in California, the bulk of the transportation investment that's been made over the past 50 or plus years has been in that middle area where we are neither driving very quickly between places, nor are we building a lot of wealth in a place. I want you to take that chart and flip it on its side. And this is asking a different question, but a question that is more attuned to our time, to what we need to struggle with today. And that question is, at what speed, so in the horizontal, we're looking at speed, do we create the most value? Where in our transportation system, at what speed are we building for that we create the most value in the system? And what I'm putting forth here is that we create the most value when we are at a very slow neighborhood speed on a street, or we're traveling at very high speeds between places in a road. And when we get into this middle area, again, where we're traveling, more than 20, 25 miles an hour, less than 55 miles an hour, this is the area where we're neither getting anywhere very quickly, nor are we building any wealth. We're spending an enormous sum of money for very little return. This is something that we call a strode. A strode is a street road hybrid. We at Strong Downs call this the futon of transportation. If you think of a futon as an uncomfortable couch that makes into an uncomfortable bed, a strode tries to do two things simultaneously and does neither very well. It tries to be both street and road. A road you can think of as a replacement of the railroad, right? A high-speed connection between two places. When you're riding on a railroad, you get on at one stop, you get off at another. There's a high-speed connection between them. When we build roads to connect places, we create an enormous amount of value. If you look at this photo here, kind of the prototypical strode, there's 4 highway scaled lanes here, very wide, designed for very fast travel. There's a center turn lane to get that through traffic, that turning traffic out of the way so the through traffic can just speed through. There's been an enormous investment here in building mobility capacity, yet nobody gets to move very quickly, right? We have low speed limits. We got traffic signals that make people go zero. Despite spending an enormous amount of money moving cars, no cars move quickly through here. A street, as opposed to a road, a street is a platform for building wealth. It is the framework that we create a place that's going to create wealth and prosperity for our community. If you look at this strode, we put elements of a street in it, right? They've got decorative lights here. They've got wide sidewalks. They put up planters and benches and all the things that, we're told make up a great place. Is this place creating a lot of value for the community? Well, of course it's not. Everybody who arrives here arrives by motor vehicle. Because of that, every business has to store motor vehicles. Because of that, all the businesses are spread apart. They've all got drive-throughs. And the amount of private investment you get per foot of public investment goes way, way down. And these places tend to be among the most unproductive that we build. As a strategy for us, instead of talking about how do we expand our existing systems? How do we build more? How do we lean into the 1950s type of transportation that has been handed down to us, that we have inherited? We actually need to step back and say, how do we make really good investments? And today, the best investments that we can make in our transportation system is to deal with the strode problem. How do we take our existing strodes and convert them into great streets and productive roads? Those are the best possible investments that we can make. Those are the investments that are going to pay massive returns to us. Now, I'm going to just share quickly how we do this. And I'm going to preface it by saying the actual mechanism here is really easy. The problem or the challenge is always cultural with this. It's always cultural. It's not engineering. It's not technical. Because if we want to go from strode to street, it's actually really easy. What do? We slow traffic. That's the first thing we do. We got to slow things down to a street speed, right? We're going to prioritize humans in a place over the through traffic going through. So we want to prioritize people walking. We want to prioritize people biking. We want to prioritize transit that's getting people through. And by prioritize, I mean the motor vehicles, the automobiles actually wait for all that other traffic to move around before they move through. There's a priority there. If we're going to build a street and create wealth, we actually have to build stuff. I know there's a lot of debate in California over the mechanisms of doing this, but the reality is we need to intensify adjacent land use, which is a jargon way of saying we just need to go out and thicken up our neighborhoods and build more stuff. And then embrace the complexity. Understand that a good street design is not ever going to come from a manual, a design manual. It's going to be something that we do iteratively over time in conjunction with what is adjacent to that street. There's an evolution that should happen over time of both the land use, the buildings and things adjacent to a street, and the street design itself. Going from road to road is the exact opposite, right? We want to speed up traffic, so we're going to limit access. We're going to limit all the things that slow down traffic. We're going to get traffic moving between places. We're going to separate our automobiles from our other ways of getting around. We want people to be able to bike between places. We want people to be able to get on a bus and get on other transit and go between places. Those modes, those ways of getting around need to be separated from each other so that they can have very quick access and so that they can move safely through those environments. Is this the temptation to mine that collective investment in mobility for short-term economic gain? And if you drive through California and see interchange, and wonder why you have massive amounts of congestion, it's because each of those interchanges robs you of your roadway capacity for, again, a little bit of short-term, economic gain adjacent. Roadways are actually very simplified down. We see that they work really, really well. So I want to take the last 10 minutes here and go back to this, because a lot of what I've talked about here, moving from strode to street and strode to road, requires us to think a little bit differently about our places as well. I want you to look at this watershed problem again and ponder how we have solved, to the extent that we've solved it. And I feel like, there's obviously places where there are problems, but in a large sense, we've actually solved this underlying problem. It's instructive to identify how we've done that. We didn't do it the way we tried to do it, during the Great Depression after World War II, right? Which was mechanical, building dams, building levees, building large systems. Humans could, in a sense, master the watershed and control it and channel it and funnel it. We found those approaches to not work, and they don't work for a variety of reasons. The one that is coming to the fore right now is that we don't maintain these things, and we don't maintain these things not because we're dumb or we're lazy or what have you, but because we're very human. And when things need to be maintained over 50 years and 75 years intervals, there's always more urgent things to do, right? There's always other things that come up. And so what we see right now is we have, thousands of dams and dikes and levees across North America that are in an urgent state of disrepair. They were built 50 years, 75 years ago. They had 50 years, 75-year lifespans. And we have no idea at all how we're going to maintain them. The other problem that what we see with this approach over and over again is, we build a levee, we build a dike, we create a dam, and now we have all this space that is not being inundated by floods, by periodic flooding. Do humans use that as a buffer zone and say, well, okay, well now, that's safe, we'll just stay out of there? No, what do? They go and build in all those places. And so what we found is that approach, that top-down mechanical construction, big kind of violent approach to managing these things is not the right way to go. What is the right way to go? Because again, I'll say, I feel like we've solved this problem. The way we solve this problem is we go out in the watershed and we say to people, you can't run your water into the ditch. You can't fill in that wetland. You can't take that parking lot and run all that into this stream. You have to retain your water on site and allow it to soak in, allow it to infiltrate, allow it to be absorbed in a sense where it falls. And so even though it might be just a little impact here and a little impact and a little impact, we recognize that it's the cumulative impact that creates the flood. And so if we can go out in the watershed and say, retain this water here, we can avoid the costly damage of that flood. Take that lesson now and tell me how we solve this problem. It mechanically is the same problem. There's some dynamics in traffic that doesn't exist in water flow. We saw that in the pandemic. People can actually adjust their patterns. That actually gives us more opportunity to solve this problem than the last one. But the way we solve this problem is very clear. It's not by building more lanes. It's not by building more interchanges. It's not by creating more systems. It's by retaining these trips closer to their source. That means very radical, crazy things like building neighborhoods, creating corner stores, creating mixed-use places, adding more homes, adding more businesses, adding more stuff near where people live, so that those trips be automobile trips if people prefer. But the market also has an opportunity to respond by providing opportunities for trips that could be done by bike, trips that could be done by walking, trips that could be local trips in an automobile instead of regional trips in an automobile. The only way we solve this problem is by building neighborhoods. We will not solve it by continuing on the current system that we're on. So I want to talk just a little bit about this concept of building neighborhoods. And, California is always a special case. I'm happy to talk about some of the special cases that you have there. Let me talk in general, and then in the Q&A, we can talk about some specifics. At Strong Towns, we talk about allowing the next increment of development intensity by right. You've now become familiar with, to one degree or another, SB 9, which I think is a statewide attempt to do this to a degree. I'm not sure or not. I'm not rejecting it outright. I wish cities would do this of their own accord because they need to. They would be better places if they did. But the idea here is that neighborhoods mature over time. This is my hometown that is being shown here. In the left screen is 1870, and the middle screen is 1904, and in the right screen is like 1940. The idea that the city evolves and changes over time is something that we see in human habitat around the world up until the end of World War II, in which case we started to build cities all at once to a finished state, kind of locking them under glass and amber and not allowing them to change and evolve. Our neighborhoods need to evolve. They need to be able to mature to the next level of development intensity. And let me give you a kind of a very clear way to think about this. If you have a neighborhood of single family homes, there really should be no regulatory friction in that neighborhood becoming a neighborhood of Now, I want to put some caveats in this, and at Strong Towns, we're very clear to say that no neighborhood should experience radical change. We're with the people who don't want to see those single family homes torn down and turned into 4-story apartments or 6-story condos. But in exchange for that, no neighborhood can be exempt from change. The rate of change in every neighborhood, X, has to be greater than 0. Every neighborhood has to have a next evolution that they're moving up to that is allowed by right with a minimum bit of regulatory friction. But every neighborhood should also be recognizable to people who live there today. If they were to say leave and come back in a decade, or they should be able to clearly recognize this as their neighborhood, even though it would be in a slightly more mature way. I'm gonna emphasize this one. I don't want to be the Minnesotan Californians. There's a lot to be learned, I think, in both exchanges, and I'm not pretending that we are in a better place, because we struggle with a lot of this too. But I think it's particularly useful in California, where a lot has been done with the best of intentions to produce better outcomes, that has had the result of raising the bar of entry to full participation in our society. What we need is everybody in our community to be able to fully participate in the creation, the building, and the maintenance of our community. And in order to do that, we need to consciously and systematically lower the bar of entry, invite more people in, invite more people to be part of building this place. Let me give you 2 very clear examples. This is something that in my city here, we call a tiny house. My ancestors in the same exact would have called this a house. For some reason, we have put the adjective tiny on the front of this and subjected it to all kinds of regulation for what is essentially a starter house, right? Like a smaller home. Around the world for thousands of years, people would build starter homes. They would build 400, 500 square, 600 square foot homes. And if I were to ask you, do any of you want to live in a 500 square foot home? Most of you would probably say no. But if I asked you, have you ever lived in a 500 square foot home? Most of you would probably say yes, at some point in your past you did, because this is where a lot of us get our start. By making this kind of thing subjected to, in my community, all the requirements of a house, plus subpart A through M of the tiny house provisions, plus you have to go out and beg permission from your neighbors. You've got to go genuflect in front of a planning board. You've got to prove that you're not a menace to society. But by raising the bar of entry to building what is essentially a starter home, we price a whole bunch of people out of our market in ways that excludes them from participating in building our community. Here's an analog of this in a commercial sense. If you're going to get in a commercial space, in most places, you're either going to pay top dollar for something that's very new, or you're going to pay a lot of dollars to renovate something up to code that is old. In Muskegon, Michigan, they tried to solve this problem by going out, buying a bunch of storage sheds, painting them up funky colors, and renting them out really, really cheaply to startup entrepreneurs. People who had an idea, a crazy idea of how they could be of service to others in the community, but didn't have the background, didn't have the knowledge, hadn't tested the idea enough to get into one of these larger spaces. And what they found is that these places are always full. They're full of energy. There's lots of people who are trying funky things. And the amazing thing about what's gone on in Muskegon is that a lot of people have gotten proof of concept in this very low risk environment and been able to then move up into these larger buildings. And their community is full of locally grounded, locally based, locally started businesses. And it's a very beautiful way to kind of expand the number of people that participate in the building of the community. Finally, the third strategy I want to give you is that we need to change our public investment strategy. If we look at local governments today, we have allowed ourselves to be positioned as the algae in kind of a food chain of governments, right? We sit at the bottom of this food chain, kind of oriented vertically, waiting for the capital flows from the state capitol or the capital flow from Washington, D.C., or what can we get from Wall Street? And we need to, if we're going to make really great investments in our place, reorient ourselves so that our primary focus is not the capital flow, but the struggles of people within our community. We actually have built cities that not only can we not afford to maintain, but are not actually serving the people who live here very well. And if we can reorient ourselves to focus on them and their urgent needs, what we find is that we can make really amazing investments. We have developed a four-step investment strategy for a strong town, and I'm going to go through this with you. Step number one is to humbly observe where people in the community struggle. Where are people having a difficult time using the city as it has been built? I'm going to stress humility here. The idea is to go out without a preconceived notion of what you're going to run into or what you're going to find, and actually try to see through other people's eyes, experience as other people experience, where's the city really difficult to use? The second step then is to ask a question. What is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? I'm going to stress smallest and right now. The idea of the smallest being we have to resist the temptation to say, what is the big project I've always wanted to do? What is the thing we can get the grant for? What is the thing in our capital improvements plan 5 years from now? If we just wait till then, we can fix this now and forever. The idea is, what can we do this moment with bones and paint and straw bales and elbow grease, not to fix this problem forever, but to just make it a little bit better than it currently is. Step number three, then, go do that thing. Do that thing right now. Don't send it to a committee. Don't hire a consultant. Don't study it for 6 months. It's a very small little thing. Just go out and do it. And then step 4 is to repeat that process over and over and over. Jane Jacobs called cities a co-creation, something we build together. And if we can get into a mindset of doing this, what we will recognize is that we don't need the next big project. We don't need the next big thing. We can actually create a lot of success, financial success. We can build a lot of prosperity. We can make very low risk, high returning investments in our places by looking at these small things we can do to make things easier for people. And the amazing thing about this is that when we do that, not only do we grow wealthier as a place, but we actually improve people's lives. I'm going to end with a little bit of an insight designed to help you kind of liberate you from what has been called to me the common knowledge problem. This idea that we all know what we all know, and we all believe what we think everyone else believes. When an engineer goes out to design a street, there's a very straightforward process that they use. They begin with the design speed. They will then ask, what is the volume of traffic that we're expected to handle? Given that speed and that volume, what does the design manual say is a safe design? And how much does that cost? It's these 4 steps: speed, volume, safety, cost, that create, in a sense, not only a linear process, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but actually a hierarchy of values as they are applied and manifested in the design process, where speed becomes the first thing we consider, volume the second thing, safety the third, and then cost the fourth. This is my street. This is where I live. This is 4th Street, North Brainerd. It's that way. It obviously looks very different today because there's feet of snow here and it's, beautiful winter. This is what it looks like in the summer. It's a very nice place. My sidewalk is the one on the right there. I want you to picture your community. I want you to picture your street, the street where you live, or a street where you would like to live. And I want to put you in charge of designing this street. And I want to ask you, of these 4 priorities in a design process, which one would you choose first? We're not going to be able to do this the way I normally do it in front of a crowd, where I ask people to shout out simultaneously their answer. But I want you to think about this in your head. If you were going to design your street, would you start with the design speed? Would you make sure that vehicles were able to travel at a certain speed? Would you start with a volume of traffic? Would your priority be, I want to make sure we can accommodate a certain volume of cars through here? Would you start with safety? Would you say, above all, I want to make sure that this street is safe? Or would you start with cost and say, I want to make sure that this street is cost effective? If you had to choose between those values, which one would you choose? And when I ask audiences of this, and I've asked this all over the country, to audiences big and small, technical, not technical, public officials, non-public officials, they all say primarily safety, right? Safety is the overwhelming things that we start with. And by the way, I've done this with groups of engineers and they say safety, right? It's their number 1 priority as well. I then ask, would you prioritize speed, volume, or cost? What would be your second priority? And overwhelmingly what I hear back is that we would prioritize cost. Cost is the second highest value we have. In a debate between speed and volume, then, do I prioritize the speed drive, sacrificing the number of cars that can pass? Or would I rather slow down speed, sacrifice speed, but get a higher volume of traffic through in the same amount of time? And people inevitably choose volume. And then speed becomes the lowest value. I want you to look at this set for a second and recognize what this represents. Because on the left here is not only the current approach, apply it to street design, but it's also, in a common knowledge game, the thing that we think everybody else believes, right? We may believe the thing on the right. We may believe the priorities on the right, but we, in a sense, are paralyzed because we believe that everybody else has the priorities on the left. I've seen it many, many times where people show up at a meeting. We're going to do some type of change that will have the effect of slowing down traffic or changing the amount of volume of traffic that can get through a street. We do this because of safety, because it makes the neighborhood a better place, because it's a more cost-effective design. And someone will stand up and say, but it's going to create congestion or it's going to slow down traffic. And everyone will kind of back up and go, whoa, I'm not sure we can support this. Because there's this general belief that everyone we know believes the values on the left. I want you to recognize and be confident that the vast majority of humans value system on the right. They are willing to sacrifice speed. They are willing to sacrifice volume in order to achieve a higher level of safety, in order to have a more cost-effective project. And when we're confronted with this dilemma, we should be very confident in going forward and choosing likewise. Complete streets is a great concept in terms of its response to a despotic problem, this problem of our streets not being respectful places for humans. Complete streets follows, the hierarchy on the left: speed, volume, safety, cost. It is a system that, in a sense, accommodates pedestrians within an auto-dominated environment without having to compromise any of those priorities of speed and volume in order to achieve a level of safety. I get why we do this, and I recognize that this is kind of a path of least resistance, at least culturally, but this is not where we need to end up. Where we need to end up is in a strong towns approach, because a strong towns approach accommodates automobiles within an environment dominated by people. It's people that create wealth. It's people that create value. It's people that create a place. It's people that fall in love, people that start businesses, people that are the reason why we build the places that we build. When we focus on humans, when we focus on their urgent needs within this environment, what we find is that we can make astounding investments that are very low risk, are very modest, that we can do at scale, that, yes, will slow traffic to a human speed, will change our development pattern in an evolutionary way over time, but we'll create places that are financially strong, incredibly resilient, and not only that, but just very humane, prosperous places for people to live in. That's the essence of a strong towns approach, that we can build places at lower costs and get a much higher quality of life out of it for everyone. I'm going to pause here. The old book is on the left. The new book is on the right. Not so new anymore. Came out in September. If you'd like a copy of either of those, they're available everywhere, including at your local bookstore. And we'll stop and take questions. I hope I went a little bit over what I intended, but I'm trying to shorten this up to, a more abbreviated form, but I'm used to doing it in an hour and 15 minutes. So you got a slightly abbreviated version, but not the 45 minutes I was shooting for.
I think we are all wrapped and completely engrossed.
Well, I appreciate that.
So I have a whole bunch of questions that have been sent to me and a few things that have scrolled through the chat as we went. And I'm trying to figure out how to make them particularly relevant to you without like saying, here's a whole info dump about our town. We have two upcoming road projects, one of which is a widening and raising of a highway that goes across the top of the San Francisco Bay, the north edge of the San Francisco Bay, Highway 37. And there are various arguments for raising it. And there's also arguments for adding lots more lanes to it, which here in California seem to be largely, that way we don't have to build workforce housing locally, we can make people drive in for further. You made a distinction between kind of roads and highways. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy of highways and how you think we should be approaching that?
I can do it very succinctly in a way that will be dissatisfying for everyone. And it will seem flippant, but it's really not. It's deeply thought out and a belief that we as an organization hold. We've gone through 70 plus years of highway building. We've gotten very little return, particularly over the last 40 plus years on those investments. And we've really maxed out our ability to get returns with that approach we should not add any additional lane capacity, any additional highway capacity, any additional interchanges, period, anywhere in this country, including and probably especially in California. And so if I were made, king of, master of California for a couple of years, I would immediately halt all highway projects. And I would put my efforts. I mean, let me make clear here that I'm not suggesting that we just abandon California to massive congestion. I would focus my efforts on dynamic responses to congestion. If we go back to the slide I had with the watershed, and I said, how do we solve this problem? We build neighborhoods. Well, guess what creates the demand for the investments in neighborhoods? Congestion creates the demand for that. Because if I'm competing against Walmart or I'm competing against the big box store and it's a 20-mile or 20-minute congested drive to get there, and you don't build another lane so I can get that down to 18 minutes for the next 5 years until that capacity is gone, all of a sudden, I've got a lot of demand for the thing that's going to be a 5-minute walk. And so congestion right now is the enemy that our system manufactures, that we have created as the avatar that we're trying to defeat. And I'm saying we'll never defeat it, not the way we're doing it, because the way we do it creates more. What we need to do is recognize congestion as our friend and ally in building productive places. Response needs to be a land use response, not a traffic highway response. I realize that's easy to say sitting here in Minnesota. We have the same kind of discussions here, and I say the same things here, and people look at me like I'm crazy. But when the most aggressive transportation funding bill that has been passed in my lifetime can only maintain 12% of the backlog of road maintenance, what the F are we doing thinking we're going to build another highway anywhere? I mean, I don't see how that's a credible approach. And I don't want to be flippant, but I don't see why I would be looked at as like not credible saying this, and people who would be arguing to build more would be credible. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Hallelujah. So we also have a strode, I think is the only way to describe it, a very industrial street, which has some stop and start bike things and is 2 lanes each way, divided with some retirement trailer parks and things like this on either side of it. And it's and 2 breweries which are across the street from each other, which people of course like to walk across the street back and forth.
Sure.
So we have the possibility and the possible funding for a moonshot here, which I realize is totally not what you generally preach.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe how you'd approach how do we turn this into a livable street, given that people have expectations of 20,000 vehicles a day on it? Yeah.
So what I see time and time again is that when people get through with this presentation or they get through with the book, the thing they turn to right away is the nasty strode in their place, right? Like this is the problem. And the reality is I don't know if I've been to Petaluma or not. I feel like if not, I've been to enough cities in your area that rhyme with yours, where I'm very confident in saying that you don't just have one strode. 95% of what you have in your city has strode-like characteristics, including almost all of your local streets. And so if you're prioritizing investments, there's a lot more to be gained a lot more quickly, working in some of those places that are not so overwhelmingly strody, right? The street where people are driving 35 instead of 20 or 30 instead of 15, where there's people walking already, there's people out there, they're just struggling a little bit. It doesn't need a complete moonshot renovation. It just needs some tweaking. What we always try to point towards is our investments that create a culture of biking and walking. Just because you can walk from one brewery to another across a strode, that might be nice, and I get why that would be a good thing. but it's not as good of a thing as if you have neighborhoods where there's like a culture of biking and walking. People are used to biking and walking. People bike and walk before they get into their cars. And the latter is actually like much easier to achieve at much lower risk. The moonshot often comes into play because that's where the federal money comes in. That's where the state money comes in. That's where we can get like the big project. And I get the seductiveness of that. I just want to point out that what you're giving up is the capacity. You're devoting the limited capacity you have as a community, be it within your staff at City Hall, be it just the bandwidth that your community conversation can accommodate. You're devoting that limited capacity to one moonshot in one place that, even if it's like massively successful, will allow you to walk from one brewery to the next. And you're taking your eye off of the many investments that you could make that would actually build a culture of biking and walking that would support, you know, a broader, more comprehensive shift. I'm not going to tell you what is right or wrong. I have that trade-off in your mind.
Cool. And I think in listening to your talk, I have answers to this, but it's worth asking you and getting it explicit. Do slower streets move less traffic? And is that bad?
I love this question. And I wrote a whole chapter about it in my book. Because the answer is no. The answer is very clearly no. And in fact, if the goal is to increase the volume of traffic going through a place, the only way to do that on a city street is to actually lower the speeds. I wrote a whole chapter about intersections, particularly focused on signalized intersections. I think you can think of the trade-off here most clearly when it comes to the difference between like a traffic circle and a signalized intersection. During peak rush hour, during that peak period of time, a traffic signal will, in some ways and often, move more volume of traffic through the intersection in the set period of time. But in all other periods of time, you actually have faster travel times, reduced travel time, without having a signalized intersection, by just having a roundabout. And think about it, like the next time when you go out and you're out at 10 at night and you hit that signal and you just sit there and sit there and sit there and sit there and wait for it to cycle. That's there's a huge volume of traffic that is caught in that non-peak period of time. All of those trips are vastly overinflated. Again, looking at traffic as something that has a dynamic response to it, we can give up a little bit in terms of peak traffic flow and achieve with much, much lower speeds, a greater volume of traffic over a broader period of time in a way that is also a lot safer, by shifting away from signalized intersections, away from four-way stops, and towards traffic circles and really the penultimate, which is shared space types of designs. And if you want to grasp what a shared space looks like, if you want to have your mind blown in ways, and Dave, maybe you can share a link to this, you can go on to YouTube and look at a video called Poynton Regenerated, Poynton, and see an intersection that handles, I don't know how many tens of thousands of cars a day, a huge volume of traffic with no signalization, no signs in any way, just people coming into a wide open intersection. And it is, for Americans, it is mind blowing, but it is also beautiful, just beautiful.
Excellent. I responded with question marks, but I trust the questioner on this. Can you ask Chuck to give a short summary of the Destiny Gonzalez story?
Yes. Yes. So I was in Springfield, Massachusetts, giving a lecture, and during the day I had gone out to look at their central library. The Central Library is a beautiful old building, and across the street, 4-lane strode, high traffic kind of thing, is the library for the parking lot for the library. And the expectation is that people will walk down to a signal, wait, cross, come back. But as we stood out there, we watched all kinds of people just walk straight across the middle of this. People had petitioned the city to address this, to create a mid-block crossing, to do all kinds of things. And the city had ignored them and responded with the traffic flow thing. We've got to move traffic through here. That would lower the level of service. That would create congestion. We can't do it. The night I was there, Destiny Gonzalez with her mom and her niece left the library. We're walking across to the parking lot and were struck by a vehicle. And Destiny, a little 7-year-old girl, was killed. This was like 2 weeks before Christmas. I write in the book about this, that it was very distressing to me, not only because I had been there and this should not have happened, and this was really, a deep tragedy. This girl was the same age as my daughter. Like I thought a lot about my kid doing something she loved to do, which is go to the library and get books. It's a very beautiful thing for little kids to do. And the idea that just an innocent act of crossing the street would result in someone's death was horrific. This happened in 2014. And in the intervening years, I have, but I want to shine a light less on me and more on the neighborhood groups, have really pushed changes here, using Destiny and subsequently other people who have been hit, injured, and killed on this street as reason for fixing it. There's been intransigence the entire way. My book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, uses this as the backdrop, as the foundation, the struggles to fix this street. And, my just eternal frustration. I made an open letter to the city a few years back after many, many tries to get this fixed. And I said, look, you've got two options. Option A, I will help you pro bono redesign this street and come up with a different approach. Or option B, I will pro bono work for the next city or the next family who has someone killed to bring a lawsuit against you for their death. The book was released in September. I started my book tour there. In November, an employee of the same library was crossing in the same place after getting off from work, walking to her car, and was struck and killed, just feet away from where Destiny was. This is the 20th person this year who's been killed on this street, not in this exact location, but along the street. And this time, the level of outrage was so great that the city engineer has gone out and done the temporary things, put out the cones, narrowed the lanes, slowed down the traffic, putting in a mid-block crossing. They've got plans and specs they're putting together. Destiny has been an inspiration for me. I never met her. I don't know, I don't know her family. I've tried to communicate with them, but they're very private, and they are Puerto Rican. They don't, English is not their first language. And so there's some distance there. I've tried to be very respectful from them. But, of the thousands of kids, there's over 3,000 kids that are killed every year. People send me their stories. They send me, tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and you become numb to it after a while. So I've kind of personally clung to this story of this little girl who was killed as a substitute for, having, it may be a poor substitute, but it's important to me because it's hard to have that deep level of empathy for literally was just an ongoing tragedy, day after day after day, of kids getting killed in similar situations. So thank you for the question. I hope that her family feels some peace with what is now happening out there.
I've got two, I think from the chat, we can derive all sorts of questions, but I've got two more explicit questions that were sent to me directly. One is which, can you describe some financing mechanisms for converting stroads to streets, particularly commercial streets that are pedestrian dominant, and also how to overcome the concerns of retail tenants? We have a downtown which is wonderfully walkable, but try to take away any parking, and of course, all the store owners scream.
Totally hear you. Yeah, totally hear you. I think in the first one, it's we think funding sources, right? And we're still in that vertical oriented mindset. Where's the money going to come from to do these things? The reality is that when you shift your mindset horizontally, what you find is that things like local matches don't have to happen. Like the infrastructure bill now is like, we'll give you $1 million, but your local match is $1 million. It's like, well, okay, we can need that money. Take that thing away. And yes, you're doing smaller projects, but you actually have more resources to do them. In the first book, we talk about switching to a predominantly maintenance oriented approach, with a fraction of the budget being these kind of small incremental things to point to the next level of improvement that we need to make. I'm just going to suggest that we've got a lot of money to do this. We just waste it on things that are not very helpful. I think that the second question is to me a lot more interesting, or the second part of the question, because there is this tension, and I think we have to acknowledge it and respect it. We have created these economic ecosystems that function a lot like coral, like a coral reef, right? If you look at coral sits there and is kind of stationary, and it requires this kind of constant movement of water over top of it in order to get its nutrients. When we look at a lot of auto-oriented places, what we see is that they function a lot like coral in that way. We need the cars coming through. And if the cars don't come through, we won't get our nutrients. And we're just getting a tiny fraction. It might take 40,000 cars to get 20 people to stop at my store. But the idea is that if we can just get enough volume passing by, little specks of nutrition will fall on us, and we'll be able to living on this very hostile landscape. What we're talking about is shifting over time to an economic ecosystem that gets its nutrients from the surrounding neighborhood. So instead of relying on that through traffic, the nutrients come from other places. And in that sense, if you need 40,000 cars to get 40 people to stop at your place, you may need, one to get 40 people to stop at your place. It's a different like economic ecosystem. And so I think we have to acknowledge that in a transformed economic ecosystem, coral will not be the dominant species, right? If you take your reef and now you bring it up on land and inundate it with organic soil and start to water in different ways, it's not going to keep growing coral. It's going to grow something else. And that something else will have a higher nutrient level and higher, output and what have you. I think we have to look at this in much the same way. So cutting off from the coral its little load of nutrient before we do anything else is going to be really damaging to the coral. It's going to be really damaging to your small businesses. Freak out, and they're going to react really poorly. And so to me, the emphasis is never to start with, how do we remove parking? How do we remove traffic flow? How do we start with that? The start has always got to be, how do we connect surrounding neighborhoods? How do we magnify connections that are walking and biking between places? And I would make an intense effort when you start to do those things to measure things like traffic flows of humans, sales of, sales that are coming from walking trips versus driving trips. Because what we want to do over time is we want the business owners, some of them, and I can say this as an outsider, some of them will not be able to evolve from coral into something else, and they will go away. But a lot of them will be able to adapt and change and evolve to serve not the tiny fraction of through traffic they can get to stop, but the surrounding neighborhoods and the people who are there. I think getting them to be more aware of where their customers are coming from, actually going out and measuring that, showing those results, showing how that changes over time is going to go a long ways towards getting people to recognize that there's more to be gained by having the people within 3 blocks come to you, go to 6 blocks, go to blocks, than there is getting another 10,000 cars a day going through. I think we need to respect the concerns that they bring to the table and, recognize that in order to get the credibility to do the things that need to be done in terms of reducing parking, we have to demonstrate that there is a customer base within the community that we can capture and direct their way.
So I'm noticing a bunch of, there's one more question that I wanted to ask other times. And of course, we've got 10 minutes left and I don't want to drag you on too long, but I'm noticing a bunch of traffic in the chat room about deliveries and big box stores and Amazon and how this vision both, well, I think you've given a good layout of how this vision ties into big box stores. And I think your earlier talks were good about that, but talk a little bit about kind of the delivery culture that we seem to be getting to.
No, it's great. It's a great question. So I'm gonna go to the extreme to make a point. Because Petaluma is not Venice, right? But I was in Venice this last summer. I was fortunate enough to go with my family. Here's the amazing thing. They have groceries in Venice. They have things you can purchase in Venice. It's really astounding. You can order things off of Amazon and they deliver in Venice. Despite Venice having no semis, but no automobile traffic, like period. They collect garbage and haul it out. They haul in kegs of beer and jugs of wine. They do, all kinds of things that normal cities do. They also do in Venice. The primary difference between the way things work in a city like Venice or even like Rome, where we were for a while, is that the distribution warehouse is not the back of a flatbed truck, which is the way it is today in America. The distribution warehouse is on the outskirts of the community. Things come into the outskirts of the community, they're offloaded, they're broken down into smaller shipments, and then smaller vehicles that navigate the city streets at city speeds and what have you come in and make those daily deliveries. And it's very efficient. It works really, really well. The way we do it is by having a flatbed pull up to every house, or having a big UPS truck pull up to every house, or a big FedEx truck pull up to every house. Even the US Postal Service uses this, where they'll drive a big, huge truck to your place, because it's a volume business, right? Like it's a volume business. We can look at their business model and we can recognize that that's what's needed to make their business model work. But I want to shift that around and have you think about it a different way. What you have said, by having excessively wide streets to accommodate flatbed trucks and large delivery vehicles and what have you, is that you're going to give a competitive advantage in your economic ecosystem to large players that can consolidate operations into a few number of places. That's a choice that your construction of your community creates. And so it's not, I want to divorce ourselves. I'm a market person. I love market feedback. I'm a free market person. If you said, are you a capitalist or not? I would say, I'm not comfortable with a current version of American capitalism, what that is, but I'm a Adam Smith capitalist. Like, I think that markets work really well to set prices and give us good feedback and drive innovation. But let's make clear what we've done with our cities. We have said in our street design that we are going to tilt our marketplace to give preference to large places that work well with large deliveries, centralized, very top-down, very large entities. And we are going to disadvantage in doing that the local smaller players in our ecosystem. And if we step back and we actually do, a productivity analysis, something that my friends at Urban 3 do quite frequently. I cited a lot in the first book. What we recognize is that the players that marketplace rewards are players that cost us a lot of money to have in our communities, cash, like in terms of the city budget, and comparatively create a lot less taxes. The ones that we're crowding out are the reciprocal. They tend to not cost very much to provide ongoing and service maintenance to, and they tend to provide many multiples of that in tax return. And so, yeah, I mean, are we ever going to have a day in a strong town where we don't have Amazon or some, equivalent? I think not. We had the Montgomery Ward's catalog 150 years ago. When I was a kid growing up in a small town where we didn't have any big box stores, we still had the JCPenney's catalog that we would get once a year, and I would order all my school clothes from, and I would show up and every boy in class had the same exact clothes because we ordered the same 5 things off of JCPenney's. Like I don't think that's going to go away, and I don't think we should demand that it goes away. But we don't have to sacrifice our economic ecosystem, our tax base. We don't have to raise our taxes. We don't have to take on debt. We don't have to make our streets unsafe in order to provide favorable conditions for that business model to flourish at the expense of other business models.
And I think that provides an answer in a way to the other question, essentially, or from one of the same questioners, which asks about small car and electric trike transport, and both the class of smaller electric vehicles and electric bikes, and how they might be influenced by and influence a town. Yeah.
When we think about a well-designed local street, you're really talking about traffic that travels at 15 miles an hour. That is a speed that is safe. That's a speed that accommodates the complexity of a neighborhood. That is a speed where if there is a mistake that is made in that system, it is very unlikely to result in a fatality or even a deeply traumatic injury. I'm not saying people won't get hurt. I'm not saying there won't be that, but the likelihood goes way, way, way down. Your margin for error also goes way up. But in a system like that, if you have vehicles that are operating at that speed, all of a sudden you don't need bike lanes. Bikes can ride in that traffic stream very comfortably. Like there's no need for a bike lane. There's no need to say you can't have a golf cart on here. You can't have a small alternate vehicle. You can't have an electric, what have you. Those things can all be easily accommodated into the traffic stream when it's traveling at that speed. The problem with those things come when you have this massive differential in speed, when you have vehicles that are traveling at 35 miles an hour down residential streets, and then you plop in something going 12 or 13 or 14. If a bike is going 12 miles an hour and a car is going 15, everybody can accommodate everybody. That will work. If you've got a bike going 12 and a car going 35, your likelihood of something tragic happen goes way, way up.
Thank you. It's 8:28. I, of course, want to be respectful of your time, and I'm most grateful for your participation. Dave, do you have any additional thoughts, things you want to toss in here?
Just probably the way I end a lot of these forums, which is tonight's been a great education. Chuck, thank you very much for being here. Now it's up to us not just to be educated, but to be active. And I don't know what that's going to mean for the next step, but hopefully everyone here tonight is looking for a way to make a difference in the community, not just to know what the changes should be. So yeah, await for the next step from Urban Chat, Know Before You Grow.
I'm seeing lots of thank you, Chuck. Your presentation was outstanding. So thank you again. And thank you to all of the participants.
That's very kind.
And I wanted to note that we obviously we have the forums coming up. Please check urbanchat.org for those, or go back and listen to the beginning of this. I will post the recording as soon as I can get it through all of the various processing stages. And I've noticed a few things about a city hearing about Rainier that might be coming up, that might be a place for us to support various alternatives there. I know that we don't want to incur the wrath of the automobile enthusiasts. And so people are kind of approaching that delicately, but let's talk. And then let's see. Yeah. So we want to talk about how we can bring these ideas to Petaluma. So please keep the conversation going. Thank you very much, Chuck. Thank you, Dave.
One very quick last thing. I did look this up before we started tonight, and I know we've been having some discussions about getting back to California, and it looks like sometime in early June, we've got a contract out to come to Sacramento. What I always do is, like, when we can get near a place, someone pays the airfare to get us out there, then it's like, okay, well, what else can we do? And so we should stay in discussion. You guys know Michelle, because I would love to, I'd love to finally get there and meet some of you and be able to look at some of these things with you together. So maybe we can make that happen sometime this summer.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody else, for coming. As I said, I will have the video up as soon as I can. With that, I think good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Good night.